speakers once a month, first Thursday at 9 o'clock. For everybody that's growing their businesses, there's always going to be something new and something different that we need to learn as we move up and grow in ourselves as well as our businesses. So we're very excited with our guest speakers for the rest of the year, but also for today. Alan has really kindly stepped up today to come and talk to us about family businesses, because this is one of the things that we build in a business is, and we don't know where we're going to, is often a family business. We either inherit one, we build our own. Could it be a family business? What happens with shares? What happens to our partners, our children, etc., with inside the business? And it's some of the answers that we needing to start to get involved in right now with the way that most of the businesses here are growing currently. And so thank you, Alan, for your time. Thank you to KPMG for letting you come and join us here today. So let's kick off from your point of view. Why is family business so important? Why is there a need to know anything about family business? What is the difference between that and just running a normal business?
Morning, Diana. Thank you. Firstly, thanks for the opportunity to chat to you guys today on something that we're very passionate about. I think everyone thinks KPMG just deals with the large banks and the large corporates, right? But actually, globally, around about just short of 40% of our income is from privately owned / family owned businesses. And the reason for that is twofold. Firstly, I mean, if you look at research done by Harvard, 80% of global GDP is from privately owned, family owned businesses. 80%. So they play a significant role in economies around the world. So and the difference with family businesses versus normal businesses, etc., is twofold. There's in every business you got management, and every business you got owners. But in a family business, you have the third element, which is the family, and they can have a significant positive impact or a significant negative impact on family business. So what we've done through our experience over the years is identify, what are the key challenges that will face a family business from continue with that sustainable growth into the future. And if I can highlight, there's 6 key areas. And it doesn't matter whether you're in China, Nairobi, I was in Rwanda, Nairobi earlier in May, or in the US. These 6 areas will impact a family business at some point in their journey. And the first one is growth. Often these families grow businesses, as with privately owned businesses, grow very quickly, but sometimes too quickly. And how do we make sure and assist them in terms of making sure that that growth is sustainable? But on the other end is, often they want to move into new markets. So there's a number of my clients that are German family-owned businesses that got operations around the world. They're leaders in their field. The German family businesses are significant players. So how do we help them move into new markets? The second area is risk. How do you manage risk in the family business? And with any business, there's risk. But within a family business, there's also the family risk. So how do you manage all that, the tax consequences, all that aspect? The third area is what we call governance. Once again, most businesses have governance. You got directors, you got trustees, but within a family, we also help with what we call the family governance. What are the rules of the game of how the family engages with the business? What are the boundaries that need to be put in place? Who can work in the business? How do you pay dividends? Who makes the decisions on exiting? All those key decisions, especially when emotions are running high, is important. Then there's the wealth management. How do you protect and grow the wealth? And we don't advise where to invest your money, but we do make sure that the structures are in place to do that, as well as the philanthropic side. Not charity, but a lot of these families, want to make a difference in the community because they're important. So how do you put in structures to drive an impact in society? The fifth area is what we call transition, and I'll send you a one-page, Diane, on this as well. But transition is really, what is the plan, long-term plan? Is it to sell the business? Is it to list the business like a Dis-Chem? Dis-Chem is family-owned, a Bell family-owned. Or is it to hand over to the next generation? And what are you going to hand over? Are you handing over ownership? Are you handing over the governance, in other words, being on the board? Or are you actually handing over the management of the business? And whatever that may be, it's a process, right? It's not an event. If it's an event, it's going to be a disaster. It needs to be a process to make sure the handover is appropriate. And the last area is what we call the people side. How do you attract and retain top talent in the business, because they help grow the business? And before COVID, for 5 years running, that was the number one risk for family-owned businesses in Europe. Attracting and retaining top talent, because often family businesses don't give shares, right? They don't give ownership. But what are the other mechanisms in place to incentivize these people to pay? So, family businesses are critical. And in South Africa, whilst there's little data, and that's a problem, we estimate family businesses contribute also around about 70 to 80% to the economy. But the one big difference here is versus other parts of the world, there's no support from government in terms of keeping it in the family. And that's a challenge. Anyway, that's a short intro. And
thanks for the short intro. And tell me, if you had to think about the businesses that are growing and that aren't yet family businesses, but are moving into that kind of space right now, what would their biggest challenge be in order to make sure that it continues to grow, number one, and that they've done it? And I don't know if the correct way maybe is not the right terminology, but in a structured format that they know that it can move forward and it can continue to grow.
Yeah, look, privately owned, like I said, privately owned and family owned, they're very similar in many respects, especially on the growth side. The only difference is the family element. So in terms of the challenges we're seeing, number one is a lack of effective financial and management reporting with timely information, making sure you're getting the right information on a timely basis to make the right decisions, and making sure that your systems and processes are in place, number one, is key. And then linked to that, I suppose, is the lack of appropriate financial controls and discipline. For instance, many times salaries are too high. Individuals pay themselves salaries before that business can actually afford it. We also seen, cash flow management and forecasting is not at the right level. You're not forecasting 6 months to 8 months in advance. And sales revenue is vanity. Really, that at the end of the day is vanity. Cash is king and cash is reality. So if you're not making sure that you've got scenario planning, proper cash flow management in place, and we've seen it even with medium-sized businesses with all the systems in the world, they're not getting it right. So that is critical. And we saw those businesses that got it right were able to steer themselves through COVID, right? That was one of the things that were able to manage that. And then the ability to separate, those personal expenses versus the business expenses. Sometimes people use the business as a personal piggy bank, and that gets dangerous when you start separating, especially if you want to sell the business, because then you have to start unpacking all those things. So that's one of the challenges in terms of. Then there's also a lack of a clear and effective strategy to grow the business. And once you have a strategy, obviously the implementation, where the markets are, what you want to do. Appropriate governance and oversight. Now, everyone thinks governance is, restrict your business and prevent you from being entrepreneurial. I disagree. If it's corporatized, definitely. But in privately owned businesses, how do you professionalize your governance in a way that protects the business, gets appropriate insights and directions? And, sometimes you want to go into a new area and you have no idea. So if you get the right bodies in place and people to assist you in making the right decisions, you can avoid some costly mistakes down the road. Then it's about also making sure you once again attracting and retaining the right talent, incentivizing the appropriately to drive the right behavior. I just want to make that very clear. You want to incentivize everyone that you're driving the right behavior as opposed to what's in it for me, and driving the right culture. And what we've seen in many businesses is, as many of you have probably heard, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If your culture is wrong, you're going to not be able to implement the strategy. And then lastly is investing in technology, appropriate technology to scale the business. And where you can do that to take the business to the next level, because you could hit the threshold, the ceiling, and you can only improve it with either additional resources from a people point of view or from a technology point of view. And there's some really good, affordable technology solutions out there that are helping businesses take them forward. So that's what we've seen are the 5-6 areas that what we call, we actually run what we got a growth readiness index, the free assessment. Complete the questionnaire and it tells you, okay, this is where the gaps are. It's a gap analysis to where you are lacking in some of those areas to drive your business to the next level.
Yeah. And as the businesses grow, particularly in the family-owned businesses, there's so many more levels of compliance now. How should this be managed, and where should people find what is really needed from a compliance point of view in family-owned businesses in SMME space?
Yeah, that is a tricky question, that Diane, because I think South Africa is heavily regulated. The legislation is increasing, and the grey listing that came about has not helped in any shape or form. I think it has increased that compliance burden, and it's not just for SMEs, it's all the way through. But at the end of the day as well, we must bear in mind that the legislation is there to protect all stakeholders, right? It's there for owners, employees, the community, the public in general. So I think it's critical to understand what is that, the legislation that's key to your business, both the broader aspects like income tax, when I need to apply for that, Employment Equity Act and all that good stuff, as well as something maybe specific for your industry. Because if you do not comply, the penalties for non-compliance can be significant. Just take, for instance, VAT and income tax. I mean, the penalties could be up to 200% of what is due to them. And SARS, they are not lenient from that perspective. So you've got to make sure that where are those critical areas, the basic ones, and making sure you can comply and what you can do in-house. What your, let's say from a compliance point of view, what your finance team generally that they do, what they can do in-house, and then what you can outsource in terms of either your accountants or lawyers, etc. And I think what is important, these regulations are also changing on a regular basis. So how do you make sure that you're getting, and there's various portals and like I said, consultants and advisors out there that can at least give you an update on what are the changes in regulations at least once a quarter. Because if there is something fundamental, you don't want to be caught off guard from that perspective. Unfortunately, I think there's no central place in South Africa at the moment where you can say, okay, these are all the laws and requirements that I need to comply with. But the basic ones, like I said, Consumer Protection Act, tax is a critical one. And once again, I think if people are having challenges from a cash flow to be able to pay, let's say, their VAT or whatever, what we've seen and what's quite important is to go and have a conversation with SARS. Rather do it beforehand as opposed to post. Post is not going to help you. But if you're having some challenges, rather go and have a discussion. They can make up a plan and help with that. And we've just seen too many businesses finding in cash flow financial difficulty, just avoiding that. And then that results in some significant challenges. And once again, apart from the financial, there's a reputational impact. Because for instance, with SARS, once you get a target on your back, they will be on your back for a while. So how do you need to manage that? And there's a lot of companies that are helping manage with that compliance on a regular basis. And I think look for those in an affordable way that's appropriate for your business. But once again, within reason. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting conversation, but absolutely, we need to make sure that we're compliant in so many areas at the moment. And it's just time consuming and a lot of admin. But if we continue on that kind of vein, as the businesses are growing and the family businesses start looking at their structures, do you believe, or first of all, what is the appropriate structure to have, or is there an appropriate structure in a business for family business, and should the children have shares?
So that's an interesting one. So we every 2 years we run what we call Global Family Business Tax Monitor, where we compare the tax consequences on a owner should they retire or should they die, right? Across 40 countries around the world. What's the implications? Should you die or should you retire and hand over to the next generation? And sadly, South Africa is number one in terms of the worst tax consequences in the world. if you were to die and retire, if the shares are owned in your personal capacity. Okay? A lot of other jurisdictions, they will give you an exemption or capital gains tax or estate duty, whatever, because then as long as it stays within the family, then they know that money will be used to be reinvested to grow and employ more people. In South Africa, we don't have that. So what is happening is people are having to put in fairly complicated structures, and I'll just explain a simple one that we recommend. Generally, the operating company, the shares should be held by a holding company. And there's some benefits regarding that. Because what can happen is the dividends from the operating company can then be paid to the holding company without dividends tax. So dividends tax free. But what that means is the money that's sitting in the holding company can then be used to reinvest into other businesses, properties, etc. But you're using the money generated from the operating business once it's there, and you're not taking out too much, obviously, and you can deploy it elsewhere. All right. So that's the one fact. The shares in the holding company can then be held by either a trust, and you see many people holding in a trust, or it can be held by yourself in your individual capacity. The only challenge will be is if something happens to you, what happens with the shares? It will trigger estate duty and capital gains tax, etc. And hence people often put it in a trust, because then regardless of what happens, the beneficiaries will still not be impacted by the CGT until there's a distribution. So generally you see the structure: trust, holding shares in holding company, holding shares in the operating company. But I also want to add that's fine and that's great, but just be wary of making it too complicated. I'm dealing with a client at the moment where there's multiple trusts, multiple operating companies. It's really a spider web of a structure that is very difficult to manage, especially if you're getting the next generation involved and they haven't been involved in setting up that structure. So keep it simple, but at the same time, understand that if you're holding the shares in your personal capacity, there is a risk, a significant risk of taxes that are due, and in some cases could result in having to sell the business to pay those taxes. So so you got to look at the structures early on as soon as possible. Put it in a structure that, like I said, the holding company ideally, and then the shares held by that. Now, when it comes to children holding shares, it all comes down to, what is the vision of the family or the business? What is our long-term vision? And who do we deem to be owners? And what I mean by that, who do we deem to be family? When you talk about children, is it bloodline, adopted, step, foster? Who can be shareholders from that perspective? Can my spouse be a shareholder? That's fine. What happens if there's divorce? Are you going to now buy the person out? You're still going to be in business. So it all depends on what the long-term vision is. And if you want your kids to be shareholders, what we're seeing now a lot is how you're preparing them to be responsible owners. All right? And that managing that level of entitlement in terms of dividends and understanding the role as an owner you have to play in terms of the contribution to all stakeholders, customers, suppliers, the community, etc. So what we're seeing a lot of, especially, the European family businesses and a couple in South Africa that are 5th, 6th, 7th generation, a lot of them not working in the business, but they have a significant role to play on the board as well as owners. So they're spending a lot of time and investing a lot of time from a very early age of how to be responsible owners and managing that challenge of entitlement, the trust fund babies and all that good stuff that could damage the business in the long term. So before they give, I would say before shares are given to children, you've got to make sure that you're preparing them for what that role means and managing it on that basis.
Yeah. It's always interesting because you never really know, should you be giving your spouse shares, children shares, and if something happens to you, then it's the most expensive tax. So like at what stage do you start putting these structures in place? But I think it's something that we've got to consider sooner rather than later.
And that's why trust is useful, because then the children can be beneficiaries. Technically, they are their ultimate owners because they're beneficiaries if it's a discretionary trust. But the decision making is held by the trustees, right? And once again, the trustees will decide on the distribution. And when we come to succession planning, everyone thinks about the business only or the directors. You also got to think about succession planning for trustees as well, and who's going to be in place for that. So once again, the spouse can be a beneficiary, but she might not be holding shares directly in the business. He or she.
And so we have had so many elections around the world. And do you think that there's going to be a major change in family businesses? Do you think the economies are going to turn in any of the countries that we should be focusing family businesses towards? What's your foresight into the the changes that are coming?
So this is not KPMG. We've got to be careful here because it's very difficult, right? 70 elections taking place. So you have to do a lot of scenario analysis. I think the biggest global impact or issue is slowing down, global inflation. If you look at Europe and the UK, they have seen inflation. They haven't seen this level of inflation in, I think, 30 years that they've been experiencing. So what we're hoping for, and it's already starting to see some reduction in interest rates, and that will continue for this year and for next year. And that will ultimately drive the global economy, right? It's going to drive consumption, drive business investment, and that will lead to economic growth and lower unemployment. And for that, this is all tied to the US, right? At the end of the day, this is all going to be tied to the US. And they haven't had an interest rate reduction, but one is expected, maybe two before the end of the year. So that's going to be critical in terms of, and we follow, right? We follow that. And the other important point on the elections is, once again, is the US election is probably the most critical in terms of who gets in. And depending on that, that could have some very significant implications for South Africa specifically and Africa. And therefore, it's very important for your business, for you to understand your business and the impact of some of these geopolitical changes that may happen. All right. If you just take the Ukraine war, I don't think many people knew about Ukraine, and secondly, the impact they had on agriculture and in the automotive industry and etc. And the knock-on effect that that's had on logistics. So, but at the end of the day, from a South African point of view, once again, our elections is with a new government of national unity. I think it's already starting to have some positive, whether hopefully it will continue on that basis, and that will drive some significant changes. But if you look at the rest of Africa, I was at the Africa CEO Forum now in May. Kenya, 60 million people, has unemployment of 5.6%. 5.6%. Rwanda, a lot smaller, 11 million people, but I mean, they're driving to be a high-income country by 2035. So the political impact in these elections are going to drive certain decisions and happening. But regardless of that, to be honest, family businesses have been able to steer their businesses through whatever economic downturn or upturn, whatever political implications have taken place, because they've got a longer term view. Generally, privately owned, especially family-owned business, plan in generations. So they're making decisions for the longer term, not knee-jerk decisions about what's happening in the next 6 months or 12 months. So I think that is the fundamental differences. So regardless of what's happening, they just need to pull the right levers and manage and steer depending on what's happening with regards to these global elections. Yeah.
And are you seeing a lot of family businesses exiting South Africa? I mean, we've had Shell announce that they're going to exit, and other big companies or corporates. But are you seeing any family run businesses exiting? And how do we navigate when these big corporates also start leaving?
So I think, let's just talk. I can't talk on, obviously, the large corporates, they make their decisions. But I think what we are seeing is, because of the impact of the global economy, businesses are making, certain medium to long-term strategic decisions. And, that's like even a small business will have to look at it, but they obviously, with the global businesses, they look at it at a global scale. But from a South African family business perspective, we are seeing pure businesses not necessarily exiting. We are obviously are seeing the next generations actually working overseas, whatever, but the actual businesses, very few are exiting. We're seeing a number, funny enough, that are investing, especially in the retail area. They're getting ready for the growth. They are predicting we've hit rock bottom in terms of from an economic point of view. They see it's going to be starting to climb, and they're opening up new stores. They're investing because they believe now's the right time to get ready. They've been through these cycles many, many times before. So we're not, but they are looking to expand into other markets because the South African economy is not growing as quickly as they needed to do. So that's what we are seeing. Looking at expanding into new markets, sadly looking at putting potentially their intellectual property in more favorable jurisdictions, Mauritius or other areas. So that's a challenge. So we are seeing a bit of that exit, but we are also seeing an exit of wealth. So one thing, the business might be here, but certainly wealth is being diversified into other markets, right, in other areas. And I think it's a healthy strategy. Not only for South Africans, but for most family businesses. I think COVID taught them some significant lessons in terms of diversification of business, number one, and diversification of your wealth. Two different things. Making sure that you don't have all your eggs in one basket. But for me, what's promising is, a number of these family businesses are investing in South Africa as we speak. They're still growing, despite the challenges of power, despite the challenges of water. South Africans are resilient, right? And they are growing double-digit figures despite what's happening.
Yeah.
So it's positive.
Nice. Everybody that joined today, if you've got any questions, please type them in the chat or raise your hand or shout out and ask some questions to Alan while he's here. This is the perfect opportunity now to pick some of his brain moments, because we need to make sure that you have answers as you grow in your business as we move forward. Dion, that hand was very fast up. How can we help you today? But you have to unmute yourself if you're going to talk.
Yes, it was. You need to get with it with the sign language. So just learn a little bit. Alan and I have already had a long conversation, and I've already implemented a bunch of his suggestions, and I've just received a whole letter from CIPC with the new registrations for the company. And they don't use English that I use. I have no idea what they're busy saying. I mean, I don't even know how to pronounce these words, never mind read them, but never mind. Okay, here's a good question. Well, hopefully a good question. My biggest concern is future-proofing the business. And what I mean with the business is the investments, the housing, the business itself, etc., etc. Because like you said in the beginning, every single moment we wake up, there's another piece of legislation, there's another piece of compliance that we have to look at, there's another piece of, it's like there's just a cascade of laws happening. How do we, and especially with BEE as well, went down that road, hated every single second of it, and I'm not doing it again. Well, let's not go there, but I'm not doing it again. How do we, as much as possible, future-proof our businesses to protect us from all of these outside influences?
I think, good question, Dion. I don't think you can ever, I think future-proofing is by having, firstly, the right team, in my view. Right team, and that's both internally as well as advisors on the other side. And having regular discussions, strategic discussions on this. I think too many times people are trying to kill and deal with too many fires on a daily basis, that they put the strategic conversations and strategic thinking on the back burner. And a lot of those things I spoke about earlier, transitioning. What is the 20-year plan? Do we have a 20 to 30-year plan, and how are we going to get there? And then once again is that 20-30 plan, whilst let's talk, well, you're still alive, but what happens after that? And people don't start thinking about it. People hate talking about that because you're talking about debt, as an example. But future proofing is about longer term, and then making sure, okay, when things change, and that's the other thing, how do we become agile? How do we make sure that our business is agile regardless of the size? The benefit of the privately owned businesses, they are agile, they can move, and they can make decisions quickly. But how do you continue that mindset despite all the legislation coming? And therefore you need to have the right guys to say, listen here, here's a new piece of legislation. This is the minimum requirements that we need to do to adhere to it, so we don't fall foul, we comply. Because at the end of the day, let's say the plan is to sell the business. Whoever's going to come in to buy the business is going to want to make sure, are you compliant? Are you sticking to the rules of the game? So, that's where the value, in a sense, also comply. Because if it's not, it's going to decrease from the value. In a nutshell, is making sure you have the right team both internally, but you don't need to employ everyone internally. You can have certain advisors that can be there to support you and to say, okay, by the way, here's a new piece of legislation, and this is how we can comply. Right? This is how we can help you, or this is what we can do. Let's say an accountant. They can do a lot of things from a tax, from financial statements, from copy, from all those stuff. A lot of the guys have got the capabilities to do that for these businesses, and therefore making sure that there's regular conversations with them. Okay, this is what I need you to do. I need you to keep me up to date with what's happening, because you don't have the time to do that. As a business owner, you're driving other areas, and therefore it's about how do you harness and focus on your strengths and making sure that other people are driving it in a different way. And that's how these businesses grow, right? That's how these family businesses have gone through multiple generations, is that they've got the right team in place and the right, I mean the right team, not only skills, but values, culture, and mindset is critical.
100%. But I also think it's, as the businesses are growing, like Dion's, for example, is now getting to the next level of understanding and wanting what to build. I think that we sometimes grow out of our suppliers that we've been using. So it's to make sure that the suppliers have the knowledge that you need, or you need to add another supplier to your base, or just somebody to give you the additional information that you need in. I think that becomes important now too. Thanks, Dion, for that.
I just want to, I fully agree with that, because sometimes they might not have the capability or the expertise. So, instance, let's say you want to open up a place in Mauritius. They have no idea how to do that. We've seen some very scary advice being given at the moment for people that don't, and that could be very costly. So, you're 100% making sure the advisors are appropriate at the stage of your business and how you take it forward. As well as internally, right? You might need to employ a chartered accountant. That might be expensive.
100%.
But to be honest, if he's going to be there for long term, they can do significant more than someone that is, just got let's say, a BCom, as an example.
Yeah, 100%. Because also advice like if Dion starts exporting a whole lot now, maybe opening an account or having an account outside South Africa, like Mauritius or any one of those kind of countries, becomes more important for him to have the money brought in, because he's going to be needing that out the country too. So those are the decisions that needed to be made. So, and that's the advice I think that people that are legal, accountants, HR, all of those kind of additional team members start becoming important. Do they have the knowledge that you need? If not, maybe your team is fine, but you need additional team members then too.
Yeah.
A couple of questions in the chat. Gina speaks about, you mentioned the trust, but taxation on trusts are high, and will that affect the concept of family business?
So, yeah, trust taxes are high, but you don't want to operate through a trust, right? I just want to make that very clear. You want your operating business to be in a company. The trust is really just there to hold the shares and, in a sense, protect the wealth if there's an event like a death or whatever. So really it should just be a conduit for dividends, and that's what the trust should be used for. Certainly not holding any key assets. Obviously, if you do sell the business, there will be capital gains, etc. But an interesting point on trust, I just want to make it very clear. If you've got any of your children, so let's say you've got a trust, and your children decide to emigrate overseas, my strong advice is you tell them not to go to France, okay? Because the French legislation does not recognize a trust. So if the founder dies there's immediate capital gains tax for that French individual, that French beneficiary, regardless of the trust, etc. So that those tax so if you've got children living abroad, you've got to also understand the tax implications in those jurisdictions in relation to what's happening in South Africa. But there is, Adrina, there is a tax on trusts. The people are not favorable. There is still value in South Africa to have a trust, but purely for holding the shares and nothing much else. Don't operate. The worst thing to do is to operate through a trust. I think John has also got another question.
John's question here. Well, this is always an interesting one, isn't it? When you've got a husband and wife, or parents and children, etc. So what advice do you have to assist family business make better decisions and handle conflict?
So it all comes down to what is the shared purpose. Regardless of the size, etc. What is the longer term vision? And it sounds simple, but I tell you, we've done research around the world on a regular basis. It really comes down to the values and what is the shared purpose. What are we trying to achieve long term? Because that then sets the foundation for all decisions happening. Number one. So that's first. Be very clear, and it's got to be documented. What are our values? What is our vision? And that's our shared purpose. Then it comes down to, in terms of managing conflict. Conflict can be destructive, but it can be constructive. And it's how to make sure that we're using the differences of opinion by listening very, very clearly, effectively to one another's points of view, right? Because often we're not listening. Often our view is the only view and the only right, and that's where the conflict. So how do we listen to see what is the best solution in line with our values? And I'll share something with Diane that can share. There's a individual I met. They're running a program globally called Nonflict. And how do you convert conflict into nonflict, right? And a very clear process, very clear way of listening, engaging, and actually coming to a common solution. Because conflict in family businesses is about, in most businesses, about lack of communication, lack of understanding. And when we deal with family businesses, there's three things that are key: about communication, and thirdly, communication, and effective communication. So that would be my advice, John. But be clear for both sides. What are our values? What is our vision? What are the rules of the game? Who makes decisions? How do you share decisions? And then making sure that the conflict is taking the emotions out, effective listening, and really coming to a common solution for both parties. And that's in a nutshell, but there's a lot more to it.
And maybe just get a mediator in to help at the end of the day.
You can. No, you can. I mean, ideally, you don't want to do that. But if it gets to bad scenarios, that would do mediator, then arbitrator. But you don't want to end up in court because it's only the lawyers there's no lawyers on this call, I presume. But there's only the lawyers that are going to win. Jan, you got another question?
Yeah, I do have another question. Just on that, with the family conflict, regular beatings help as well.
Dion. Yeah, only you.
Okay, she recorded it.
Okay, going back to the trust and the holding companies and stuff like that. With the trust or the holding company, would it be advisable, especially now that we're moving into the international and export markets, to actually have that trust or the holding company internationally, like in the Seychelles or Mauritius?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of businesses do that. It just makes it easier for trade, especially if you're going into Africa or other businesses. Mauritius is definitely the avenue. They've got some very favorable legislation for businesses to do that. So certainly that is the case. But once again, also looking at which jurisdiction is the best. I would not just do it from a tax perspective. You got to say what makes business sense. So we're seeing a lot of guys setting up in Dubai, even the UK. And the UK, maybe from a tax perspective, is not the greatest, but from a access to market, that's what we've seen the guys do. So looking at where you want your base to be is good. There's also some favorable tax legislation in South Africa for what they call headquartered businesses. So let's say you got your headquarters here and you've got operations, there's actually some favorable legislation here as well. But I think it's to get the advice on, where do we set it up and what is our plan, and looking for the right jurisdiction. You're mute, Windows.
Sorry. Yeah. Where does a person find the right advisors when wanting to move into international markets? So I think it also depends on what advice, what advisors are you looking for. So if Alan can speak from a KPMG side, but there's a lot more to going into the international markets. So Alan, what do you think about that?
So yeah, firstly, I mean, is to understand the strategy for the international markets, right? What we're seeing is, do you want to open up a business there? Do you want to find a distributor? Do you want to partner with someone? And that certainly going into Africa, that's what we've seen has worked really well, finding the right partner. The likes of KPMG and some of the other big international firms, we've got a number of skills and colleagues in those jurisdictions that can, how can I put it, that can give advice in terms of, how do you open up a business on that side, who not to talk to, who to talk to. No, seriously, certainly going into Africa, that is very, very important. What are the rules of the game, and can have a conversation with the people to say, okay, this is what we want to, that's what we want to try and achieve. And then there's some other businesses, I mean, for instance, in Cape Town, Veldskoen, I don't know how many people know the Veldskoen group. I mean, I met them 2 weeks ago. They are so open to share their learnings and their experiences on their international expansion. I mean, they're now in 32 countries, I think. So I think it's also good to learn from other businesses that have tried it. Some have, burnt their fingers. Many have. But there's a lot of advice, and I would like to say the big four or the next tier down, they've got international organizations that have got links. I think it would be good, both from a tax perspective, but also from a market understanding perspective. I think there's two areas there, and the structure from that perspective. Yeah. But yeah, Google can give you lacquer results, that's for sure.
And there's also every country, they have incentives. So don't forget that too. We were chatting to somebody in Wales the other day, and the same thing, she was saying exactly how the government is incentivizing at the moment. So you've really got to understand those markets. I mean, I've taken a company from a garage-based business. She exports to 18 different countries now. But every single country, you've got to really do an investigation, research, understanding why you're going there. It's not just a thumb suck anymore, because you can get burnt, and you can burn very quickly when you step into the international market. And I think one of the big things, Alan, is most businesses don't have the right cash flow in local business before they step into international waters. Are you finding that a similar kind of view when it comes to your clients in international space? Are they able to sustain themselves locally before they go into international waters, or are they going to international locally?
So you're right. I mean, funding is critical. So what we're seeing is, before people going in, have they built up sufficient capital to go there, or at least have the financial backing from one of the financial institutions, because it's going to take a lot, number one. Alternatively, looking for investors, right? So looking for partnering with someone, just testing the market. And that's why I think that would be probably the better model, to find a distributor potentially, and then to understand who the right partners are, to do it in a staged process as opposed to a big bang, because it's just too expensive, right? And then the other part is, what are you going to supply? Just the logistics. You got to understand the entire supply chain, air freighting versus sea freight, etc. What does that model look like? And that is also a costly exercise, but people have done it, right? The people have done it. They've been very successful. But you've got to make sure you got that financial backing, not only for the next 3 or 6 months, for at least, I would say, a year to 18 months, that you can sustain it, because it is going to take a while to grow that brand and grow that market in that area, unless it can sustain itself very, very quickly. So you're right. You need local, but you need to have the right backing, financial partners, investors, etc., whatever they may be.
Yeah, nice. Right. Is there any other questions that anybody has, or tips that they want to give from working with or having their own family business, or working with other family businesses? Is there any other information that anybody's needing from Alan from a KPMG point of view? Just some ideas in any form. You have him at your beck and call at the moment, but he's going to be leaving shortly, and then there goes your opportunity. So please really think about what is your next step that you're currently in at the moment in your business, or what's the next step that you're going to be looking at, and what's your biggest growth that you know that you're going for, and what does that mean to you in your business? And I think that's often what we forget about, is when we jump in growth, do we have the structures in place first of all? Do we, like we've been talking about, is there something that you know that you need, or do you think that you're growing into a space that you don't know?
So maybe while they're
Is often
thinking,
the
Diane,
case.
while they're thinking, just we are hosting our 10th Family Business Conference in KZN 12th and 13th of September. I'll send you an invitation which you can share to everyone. And what we try and do, it's a day event with cocktails. We try and connecting family businesses at all stages with one another to learn from one another. And we provide, it's not a talk shop, it's actually a workshop. We go through case studies where family business shares some of their journeys. Last year we had one in Cape Town where we had the guys from Food Lovers share their story on how they grew, and we talk about various topics. And this year will be about transition, it will be about financing growth, it will be about technology. So we're trying to make it as topical as possible, and we move it around to the different centers once a year. But it's really insightful in terms of learning, and there's no silver bullet. I just want to make that clear. There's no one page fits all for family businesses. Each one's we can share insights, we can share thought leadership, but some of those ideas you need to make sure what fits best for your business and I think for even if you're not a family business, you can learn so much from some of these well-established family businesses. They've the whole topic on ESG is such a key topic for the large listed and corporate businesses. Family businesses have been doing this for generations. We've got a family business in the UK. It's the oldest brewery, started in 1886. The family are still running it. 1886, still going. And what they've done from ESG is amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Drina's asking if you can share the link for that survey. Sorry, or where can we find that survey that you spoke about earlier?
I'll do that. I'll send it to you, Diane, then you can share it to the group.
Thanks. Yeah, perfect. I see Famelo's typing furiously. Famelo, why don't you just unmute yourself? Oh, there we go. When is the right time to start implementing these structures for managing growth, and how do we prepare the family and the business? That's an interesting question. Thanks.
I think as soon as possible. So, for instance, you don't want to be, if let's say you own the shares in the business now, you don't want to wait until it's double the size in 2-3 years' time to do that, because when you do that, that's going to trigger capital gains tax, right? Because you're going to have to sell the shares from your personal capacity into the holding company or into the trust. So, you got to try and do that as soon as possible. If it's an established business, there is going to be some tax you're going to be paying, but it's going to prevent or protect or save you significant amount, 5-10 years down the line if you don't do it now. So the sooner, I would say, the better. And how do you prepare the family and the business? So the sooner those conversations happen as well, the better. The importance about teaching your children financial literacy or how business works is so critical. Let me tell you how to be an entrepreneur, how to start imparting that entrepreneurial spirit to the next generation is key. Unfortunately, they should be teaching that in schools, but they don't, right? They're not teaching, they're teaching a whole bunch of other stuff, but let's not get into that. But where we've seen families successful, those families that, engage about business in a fun way, taking the stress, playing I heard this week one family, they were playing a rich man, poor man board game with their kids, and they were talking about it from a rich dad, poor dad. I didn't know there was a board game, rich dad, poor dad board game, but they were doing that but it's about how do you engage, how do you give back? You know, we talk about philanthropy, but how do you take your children, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give some of this money back, but they need to know. I think that it's important they need to know about the business, but at the same time being managed on the entitlement. And I think many people don't want to share how well the business is doing because they wanted to manage the entitlement. The problem comes in, and I had one client, he was 72, his kids did not know about the size of the business. They thought it was, you know, a small little farm operating somewhere. I can't mention the name. But then the risk is if something happened to him at 72, they're going to step in, they have no idea. They have zero idea. So and once again, coming back to the earlier question John had, is about the values, it's about the vision, imparting that at an early age, and getting the family engaged. And it doesn't mean they have to work in the business, but at least they got an entrepreneurial understanding of how the business operates and work, and they can do whatever they like. If they want to work in the business, they can. But how do you prepare them? And it's about preparing them in various ways and forms. And I think the earlier, the better. The earlier, the better. That's what we've seen work well.
Interesting. Just going back to John's original question, it's quite interesting how we forget to put into place what everybody's roles are. So even though the ownership or the shares are between husband and wife, what are your actual roles inside the business and what are the management, almost like looking at your organogram. So who makes decisions for what? Why is the conflict if everybody's got a clear, path within inside their business? And also, Alan, what are your thoughts of having a board that's not just the family to make those, decisions as they move forward? So we have structures of staff and management, and then should there be a level of board for family run businesses that are not just families, so it's not just the shareholders?
So coming back to your first point, Diane, it's important to understand what hat am I wearing when I'm making a decision. Am I making a decision as management? Am I making the decision as an owner? Or am I making the decision as family? And John, with you and your wife, you're wearing all three hats. It's just to make sure when you're making the decision, which hat are you wearing? And there's ways of managing that, making sure we have a correct agenda for the decision, and etc. But coming back to your question on boards, I think it is healthy for when you look at the board to make sure, do we have the right skills on the board to drive this business forward, whether it's family or not family? Okay, so that's the important point of view. First, assess the board in terms of our current capacity and our current skill set, and what do we need? Are there any gaps for taking it to the next level? And if there are gaps, are there people in the family that can do it, or do we bring an outsider? And I think an outsider brings a different perspective, and they can challenge. And what we've seen through research, not that we've done, but others, that where there's greater diversity in gender and ethnicity on a board has a direct positive influence on your bottom line. And I'll give you an example of a family business that I deal with. It's been owned by two brothers for like 30 years, white male, and let's call it in the automotive sector. And they brought in a black female, had no knowledge, zero knowledge of the automotive sector. But the questions she brought in as a non-executive director, the questions that were asked in the board meetings challenged the board in terms of a different way of thinking. And that is where the value. So whatever you do, whatever the board you create, is everyone's got to add value in that board. They've got to have the right skill set. So there's no family or yes, just family. I think it's a balance, but making sure that the right people are sitting around the table making those decisions, because ultimately the board is responsible for the governance and strategic direction of the business. And I think too many of the youngsters, they want to be a director, right? They want to be a director of the family business, but they have no idea of the responsibilities and liabilities that link to that. So how do you start preparing them, but also at the same time bringing in, I think, independence with the right skill set and support to take that business to the next level, and making sure there's diversity, because the market, your clientele is very different and it's changing all the time. So how do you connect with that market on a daily basis?
Absolutely. And I think that what a lot of business owners forget is it doesn't cost a huge amount of money, non-executives, to put them on a board. You know, there's a lot of board members that are being paid a lot of money, but then there's also a lot of board non-execs that are not being paid a huge amount of money, but also looks good on their CVs. So, and a lot of people want to give advice. So if you're paying them a small amount of money, they're adding to their CV, but they're also giving the right advice, which is the important side. I mean, I always get my clients to build a virtual board. So, you know, think about different positions that sit around the board. It's always the interesting ones, because most times they can't fill a 10-seater table if I give them a very specific role that needs to sit at the table. And it's always interesting to see, like, who else you need in your circle in order to get the right knowledge that we need to grow a business. So please don't forget, you know, to start building the right networks around one another.
And
It's been amazing.
There's also some good training on boards for privately owned businesses. I'll send it to you. Sirdar is one, and they can get businesses. You know, there's some really good training on that. But yeah, the right board is critical. Sorry, Diane, I interrupted you there.
No, not at all. Yeah, absolutely. Sirdar is great. We've engaged a number of times with them. I've done some of their training, which is quite interesting. Sitting on other companies' boards, organizations' boards, is always an interesting debate that happens, but a really valuable one. And so don't forget that as we move forward either. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Alan. Thank you for everybody that was jumping online with us today. It's always good to have these kind of conversations. We need to gain knowledge in order to make better business decisions. Alan will send me a whole lot of information, which I'll pass on to everybody that's been sitting here today and enjoying the conversations with us. Don't forget, next month we have another guest speaker. We have a couple of international guest speakers coming forward in the next little while as well. And if you do have any questions for Alan from a KPMG viewpoint, please let me know and I can pass you Alan's information. I'm not going to share Alan's information with everybody because he will just get spammed, and we don't want to do that either. I mean, I know that I've linked him to Dion, which is maybe a problem because I don't know how many millions of emails Dion's already sent you. But thank you to everybody for joining online. We are almost at the hour, and go out, be fabulous, and grow your business. And we'll see you again. And thank you, Alan, once again. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Dan. Good luck,
Thanks,
everyone.
Alan. Some great ideas.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.